Welcome back to our channel where we provide updates and undisclosed narratives on Catherine, Princess of Wales, and her royal family. We are excited to share the following news. Prince William delivers a devastating verdict to put an end to Meghan's return and shock Harry. According to the report, on the morning of January 20th, it was precisely 9:48 in the morning. Immediately after the delivery of a verdict that was conclusive and unalterable, Prince William completely severed a split branch from the royal family. When this took place, it was London time. This decision, which was taken in the eerie quiet of the royal halls and was the consequence of a crisis that threatened the very foundations of the monarchy, was not designed to heal a wound, but rather to cauterize it for all eternity. It was made in response to a crisis that threatened the very foundations of government. As the aftershocks continue to tremor across 2 continents, and a duchess is claimed to have been left in tears, the attention of the world is focused on the subject of what actually motivated the future king to utter a statement from which there is no escape. After it became public knowledge that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were involved in a charity controversy, Prince William summoned Meghan Markle and Prince Harry to leave Highgrove. There was a moment that had arrived beyond the golden gates and the stone walls that were insurmountable, and it was a period that no courtier could halt or that no process could confine. When Kensington Palace published the statement, it was not in the context of a discussion. Rather, it was a judgment. No, this was not a remedy that would only be effective for a brief period of time. Rather, it was an action that would be permanent. The statements dropped with the strength of a constitutional thunderclap for those persons who had been following the torturous, multi-year split that had pulled the House of Windsor apart. The customary morning bustle was absent from newsrooms all throughout the globe, from London to Los Angeles, and the result was a stunned silence that reigned in every single one of them. A firestorm broke out on social media platforms as a consequence of a feeling that was a mix of shock, vindication, and disbelief. Later on, insiders close to the Sussex camp in Montecito, California, would describe Meghan Markle as being entirely unprepared for the situation. The reason for this was not the disagreement in and of itself, rather it was the harsh and unrelenting finality of the remarks. Throughout the annals of history, the door had not only been closed, but it had also been barred, locked, and entirely sealed off. In this particular fashion, William, Prince of Wales, was acting not in the position of a brother, but rather as a king in waiting, with the intention of establishing his authority. Each and every word of the statement was a demonstration of a new and more harsh sort of leadership, one that was produced in the furnace of personal betrayal and institutional risk, according to sources from inside the organization. This revelation was made by sources who were within the organization. A single definitive gesture was all that was necessary to remove the carefully created ambiguity that had characterized the reign of his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II. This ambiguity included the nuanced diplomacy, the calculated silences, and the mantra of never complain, never explain. This was a new philosophy that appropriated a new period that was more perilous. As a result of the leadership of the future King William V, the monarchy would no longer be able to withstand attacks. Rather, it would perform surgical procedures to eliminate the source of the illness. It is necessary to understand the significance of this event by looking past the drama that was taking place within the family and seeing it for what it truly was. A premeditated, strategic, and irrevocable decision to protect a 1,000-year-old institution from what the palace had come to perceive as an existential security risk. In order to do so, it is necessary to look past the drama that was taking place within the family. The season of questioning. During the month of May, it was not a single event that planted the seeds for the announcement that was made in December. Rather, it was a prolonged and difficult season of discontent that nurtured those seeds. Reports indicate that the customary tools of royal diplomacy were utterly ineffectual during the period of time that was characterized by a mounting level of tension, which occurred in the autumn of 2024. At this point, the fragile peace that had been maintained by polite gestures and carefully worded public announcements had been completely and utterly broken. It is important to note that the importance of this time period was huge in the case of Prince William. Over the course of many years, a war of narratives had been raging over the Atlantic Ocean, and he had seen it as it threatened to engulf his family and do harm to the very institution that he had been born to administer. As far as he was concerned, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was the principal focus of his consideration. The more William saw what he considered to be a continuous and well-coordinated attempt to damage his wife's career and public image, the more outraged he grew, according to several individuals who are acquainted with the palace. Catherine, who was also the co-guardian of the future of the monarchy, had been unrelenting in her efforts to symbolize stability, dignity, and unity. She had accomplished this by being a tireless advocate. It seemed as if she had been playing the long game as she responded to criticism with a level-headed fortitude that reminded one of the late Queen. On the other hand, it seemed that for every step she took forward, a fresh wave of attacks from the media, which had often come from narratives that were unfriendly to the monarchy, tended to push her back 2 steps. This was the predominant pattern. There would be tales that would emerge, each one having a subtle poison that was intended to sow doubt and provoke disagreement. These stories would spread like wildfire. In order to disrupt royal vacations or to overshadow charitable initiatives, these tales would be meticulously prepared and strategically executed. The unfortunate events that have taken place in William's life are not the result of a random happenstance. According to statements made by others who were familiar with his style of thinking, it seemed to be a psychological assault that had been well planned and executed in advance. In addition to that, the timing was too convenient, and the patterns were too precise. The monarchy's most potent instrument in the past, quiet, had turned out to be a big disadvantage for the monarchy. He gradually came to the realization that silence had become a significant disadvantage. The individuals who were attempting to undermine the authority of the crown believed each day that passed without a firm response to be a victory for their cause. There was not just a psychological level of strain, but there were also strategic considerations involved. Keeping a close check on their overseas partners and allies was something they were doing. It is the concept of unchanging stability that serves as the foundation for the influence of the monarchy, particularly its soft power on the world scene. The public conflict that was still going on was undermining that foundation, turning what had been a symbol of British continuity into a show of broken family ties. When William was going through this period of severe reflection, he had little option but to confront the subject of his own legacy. He was well conscious of the fact that even a single error may have consequences that would have an effect that would continue for decades. In the course of history, rather than recalling the complexity of his personal anguish, history would judge the strength and insight of his leadership over the course of history. The monarchy was not merely a family. Rather, it was a constitutional pillar, and the preservation of it demanded sacrifices that may be difficult for regular people to comprehend. The monarchy was a family. As a consequence, the decision to take action was not the outcome of an instinct. Rather, it was the result of a dark and lonely thought process. There were instances in the past when there were attempts at constructive reconciliations and incremental modifications, but these attempts had not been effective. A public, personal, and emphatic pronouncement was required, one that would leave no room for ambiguity or potential for misunderstanding, and it would also leave no room for critics to take advantage of doubt. It was time for such an announcement. William was of the opinion that the decision that would usher in a hard new winter for royal connections was absolutely necessary for the United Kingdom to have another spring. This choice would begin a brutal new winter for royal relations, and the autumn of 2024, symbolic of degradation and change, gave the doomsday backdrop for such a decision. The feelings involved from Panorama. It is required to go back in time over 30 years to a moment of anguish that the young prince experienced and which carved itself into his consciousness in order to have a comprehensive knowledge of the iron will that led to Prince William's final choice. This is necessary in order to have a thorough comprehension of the steel will that led to the ultimate decision. The year 1995 was the year when his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, consented to take part in an interview with Martin Bashir of the BBC. The results of this interview would turn out to be a bombshell that would erupt somewhere in the middle of the monarchy. As William had long feared, the interview was gained by deception, manipulation, and the use of forged documents through the use of deception. A number of years later, an official inquiry would demonstrate what William had suspected for a considerable amount of time. Bashir had taken advantage of his mother's most private concerns in order to fabricate a public confession that would ultimately lead to the disintegration of the royal family. Immediately after the conclusion of that probe, William published a statement that was rife with scorching rage. This speech offered a rare glimpse into the depths of his agony. According to his declaration, "I am of the opinion that the dishonest manner in which the interview was collected had a significant impact on what my mother said." In William's opinion, the Panorama interview was not only a media controversy, rather, it was the initial sin from which so much subsequent anguish had flowed. He said that the interview was a significant factor in the deterioration of the relationship between my parents, and it has also caused harm to a great number of other people. It revealed that a member of the royal family could use the international media as a weapon against the institution, which would have massively detrimental ramifications. This precedent would have severe repercussions, since it established that the royal family could attack the institution. With his own eyes, he watched how it contributed to the preservation of a poisonous narrative, how it estranged his mother, and how it eventually played a part in the chain of events that ultimately ended in her awful death. This history is not only a background. Rather, it is the psychological key that serves as the key to unlocking the door to understanding his conduct in the year 2024. During the ongoing conflict with his brother and sister-in-law, William saw a glimpse of a terrifying reversal of events that had taken place in the past. One of his family was utilizing a big media platform to express their dissatisfaction with the institution, to challenge it, and to construct a narrative that was very destructive to the monarchy. He saw this member of the family engaging in all of these activities, a pattern that he had been conditioned to consider as an existential threat ever since he was a teenager, included the orchestrated media operations, the targeted disclosures, and the relentless undermining of his wife. All of these instances were examples of the pattern. In the opinion of many who are a part of the constitutional community, William's decision not only represents a significant break from the past, but it is also a rupture that was born from the very history itself. To phrase it another way, he was unwavering in his determination to prevent the occurrence of events that had occurred in the past. The final choice was a firewall that was built during the process in order to prevent the fire that had burnt his mother from ever again accessing the inner sanctuary of the monarchy. This was done in order to prevent the fire from ever reaching another person. In contrast to the institution, which had failed to protect Diana from the manipulation of the media and internal struggle, William was resolute in his commitment to protect Catherine and the crown, regardless of the personal cost that this would entail. Not only was he attempting to set boundaries for the present, but he was also attempting to exorcise the demons of the past with his comment. For a son who was grieving, this was the realization of a silent promise that he had made. He would never do this again. There would never be another instance in which the monarchy would allow itself to be enslaved by a narrative that it was powerless to have any influence on. The sorrow of losing his mother had taught him a hard lesson, which was that some threats cannot be handled. They can only be eradicated without any compromise. He had learned this lesson from the misery of losing his mother. The following is a list of Windsor War Council members. At the beginning of December, a small council that had strategic objectives got together to discuss the situation. While a cold winter light was falling over the medieval grounds of Windsor Castle, the gathering took place that same moment. The meeting of the family was not like any other you might expect. According to sources located inside the palace, the gathering functioned as a formal council of war, and its objective was to give final approval to a decision that had been in the works for a number of months. The location was crucial due to the fact that Windsor is not a dwelling, but rather a fortress that serves as the final seat of power and authority for the royal family. King Charles III, the sovereign; Princess Anne, the devoted traditionalist; Catherine, the future queen consort; and William, the heir apparent, who led the proceedings, were the four persons who were present in the room. William was the one who led the proceedings. They were a representation of the past, the present, and the impending future of the monarchy of the United Kingdom. William began his presentation by giving a remark that had been meticulously considered and prepared in advance. Legal and diplomatic advisors had reviewed each and every phrase and given their permission to each and every one of them, with the intention of leaving no room for doubt in the event that further legal or public relations concerns occur. The proclamation was planned to be constitutionally sound as well as emotionally devastating. Additionally, it was intended to leave no opportunity for controversy. The approach of appeasement and optimism, according to his argument, had failed in achieving the desired results. As a consequence of the continued state of uncertainty, the status of the monarchy's reputation, as well as its ability to continue its activities, was suffering substantial harm. In accordance with his statements, it was a malignant condition that required prompt and significant surgical surgery. While sitting next to his kid, King Charles felt the apparent load of a father's anguish. He was a father. Additionally, at this same moment, he was going through a period of intense personal suffering. Despite the fact that he had spent years attempting to bridge the ever-widening chasm that existed between his two sons, he was now faced with the terrible reality that his duty as king obliged him to accept a move that would legitimize the estrangement that existed between them. As a consequence of his personal history, which includes the public grief of his divorce from Diana and the protracted path to public acceptance with Camilla, he had a unique knowledge of the terrible effects of family feuds staged on a global stage. He was able to articulate this insight in a way that was both distinctive and effective. Even though his heart yearned for his family, his brain, which was led by the tremendous duty of the crown, recognized that the survival of the institution had to be the most important worry. This meant that he had to prioritize the institution's survival. Through the act of giving his approval, which is analogous to a king giving in, he approved the painful but necessary maintenance of his empire. Because she has always been a realistic person, Princess Anne approached the situation with a stoic and uncompromising attention on the institution's integrity. She did this in order to address the issue. She had been a proponent of a harder attitude for a substantial length of time, and she had often urged that choices on strategy should not be based on emotions, according to those who were familiar with the situation. She drew the attention of the council to the fact that history is rich with the wreckage of great organizations that failed to demonstrate courage and instead chose to compromise. She called their attention to this truth. She was of the opinion that the monarchy could no longer afford to create the image that it was weak, and she was of the opinion that holding a debate for an extended period of time was a sign of weakness. They claimed that she underlined the fact that a leader must place the needs of the institution above those of disruptive people, and that her remarks were able to cut through the emotional pressure that was present in the room. Her unwavering and duty-bound attitude, which was so reminiscent of her late parents, provided the vital backbone of support, presenting the option not as a family issue, but rather as a constitutional requirement. Her parents had passed away. Catherine performed a role that was not very noticeable, but has a tremendous deal of power anyway. She had been the most prominent person among those who had participated in the efforts that William was attempting to put an end to. As proof that she is a vital strategic partner in the operations of the monarchy in the future, the fact that she was present in the council was evidence of the fact that she is doing so. Despite the fact that she brought a sympathetic perspective to the table, since she was aware of the human cost of the decision, she was also conscious of the basic need of clarity. The subtle assistance that she provided, which was a direct outcome of her own terrible experience, contributed to enhancing the collective commitment that the council had. At the end of the day, after a long and difficult conversation, everyone arrived at the same conclusion. An undeniable, unrelenting, and unbreakable separation would take place. This barrier would be indestructible. Their line of thinking was that it was not a kind of punishment, but rather a preventative step that they were concerned about. Drawing a line in the sand, which would go on to define the character of the ensuing 2 reigns, was an act of self-preservation on the part of the monarchy, the expense of preserving stability. Prince William's revelation has ramifications that go well beyond the grief of a single family. This decision will have an effect on the future of the British monarchy and its place in the world. This is a big risk. William showed a new, forceful style of leadership by taking immediate action instead of being vague. This kind of leadership is worse than traditional leadership. The judicial and diplomatic investigation from last autumn stated that the major purpose was to bring back stability and public confidence, which had been hurt by the situation. This was the major objective. Washington and Ottawa were allegedly keeping an eye on the instability in the country, which worried their friends across the world. The monarchy, which is the head of the Commonwealth and a key part of British soft power, cannot be an institution that is falling apart. This is because the monarchy is in charge of the Commonwealth. William's choice told the world that the crown was in strong and resolute hands. This was a big indication, but the person has to pay a lot for clarity. When the permanent split happens, 2 competing courts form: the formal House of Windsor in Britain and the powerful and media-savvy Sussex brand in California. The 2 courts are in direct competition with each other. This makes it possible for several stories to fight with one another forever. Royal historians are worried that a public and long-lasting split of this extent has never happened in modern times. Edward VIII's resignation sent the Duke of Windsor into exile, but the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have a global platform and a lot of support, particularly in the U.S. In the U.S., this is particularly true. William's action may have fixed a problem within the company, but it may have created a bigger problem outside the company. It is impossible to know what will happen to the monarchy in the long run. One way to look at the action is as a smart way to deal with a catastrophe. William made the firm easier to run by getting rid of disagreement and criticism from both within and outside the organization. This has let the group focus on its constitutional obligations without any interruptions. He has made it clear to everyone in the family that duty and loyalty to the crown are not up for debate. Setting up a rigid discipline that has not been there for decades might make the monarchy stronger from the inside, making sure it stays alive. The institution conveys a strong message that it is more important than anybody else, particularly the king's son. This message is really important. However, the change might turn off a lot of people, especially younger people, who would see it as harsh, elitist, and a sign of an archaic institution that cannot keep up with contemporary families. Especially for the younger generations. It may not be good for the future king to publicly and permanently kick his brother out of the church. This is possible. This would make the monarchy seem like a cruel and ruthless business, instead of a symbol of national unity. The action that was supposed to display strength may have turned out to be a weakness. This statement acknowledges that the monarchy could only resolve its conflicts via exclusion, rather than empathy and concession. Prince William, who has bet that the House of Windsor would survive into the 21st century, thinks that only a smaller, more organized, more divided version can continue. People all across the globe are watching this great and terrible decision to see whether it keeps the crown or ends it. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts, and goodbye for now.